The morning began with the sea calm and wide, the kind of calm that made the horizon look endless. The research vessel moved smoothly across the water, its engines humming a steady rhythm that had become part of the crew's lives. On board, people went about their duties with the discipline of routine. The senior staff carried clipboards, checked instruments, and exchanged brief words about data and schedules. Their movements were practiced and calm, shaped by years of experience. But scattered among them were the younger ones, the trainees, who moved with more energy than control. They had been given the nickname Cubs by the older crew, not as an insult but as a gentle reminder that they were still learning, still growing into their roles. The name stuck, and in time even the trainees themselves smiled when they heard it. The Cubs filled the lower decks with their presence. They cleaned equipment, polished metal rails, carried supplies from one side of the ship to the other, and followed instructions with a mixture of seriousness and excitement. Their energy often turned even simple tasks into small adventures. One might hurry to finish a job first, another would double-check every little step, and sometimes their nervous chatter filled the air. Their enthusiasm often caused mistakes, like spilling water buckets or mixing up tools, but the seniors rarely scolded harshly. Instead, they corrected them with patience, knowing that each of them was on the same path they themselves had walked years ago. The day carried a rhythm that everyone knew well. The sun rose higher, the salt air blew across the deck, and the ship's metallic surfaces glimmered faintly under the light. On the upper levels, officers spoke into radios and watched the horizon, their minds occupied with maps and data. On the middle decks, meals were prepared, floors were scrubbed, and the smell of oil lingered from the machines. On the lower decks, the Cubs worked side by side, their laughter breaking through the monotony. For them, every detail of the ship was still fascinating. The hum of the engines under their feet, the faint vibrations through the walls. Even the sound of the waves hitting the hull, it was all part of the excitement of being at sea. To the Cubs, the vessel was not just a workplace. It was a living classroom. Each tool they handled, each instruction they followed, carried the weight of learning. Some carried small notebooks tucked in their pockets, scribbling down details they didn't want to forget. Others relied on memory, trying to impress by repeating exactly what their seniors had told them. The Cubs worked hard, but even in their focus there was still the playfulness of youth. They joked quietly, competed to see who could carry supplies faster, and sometimes turned serious work into a chance to prove themselves. Yet beneath the comfort of routine, the sea always held its own quiet reminder. Control was never complete. The vessel moved steadily, but everyone knew that one small mistake could ripple into something bigger. The seniors carried this truth in the way they worked, always double-checking, always watching closely. The Cubs, however, didn't fully grasp it yet. For them, today was just another ordinary day, another chance to show they belonged. They did not know that even a calm sea could hide surprises, or that even the smallest oversight could change the course of the day. As the sun climbed higher and the ship continued forward, the crew remained busy with their duties. To anyone watching, it looked like the vessel was locked in its usual rhythm, predictable and unchanging. But among the Cubs, in the rush of their eager movements, a quiet thread of chance was already weaving itself into the story. None of them noticed it, none of them could predict it, but the ordinary day was already setting the stage for something extraordinary. The lower deck of the vessel always carried a different kind of air. It was cooler, the smell of metal and oil stronger, and the hum of machinery constant in the background. This was where the drone pens were kept, long rows of secured compartments where the research drones rested when not in use. These drones were not ordinary machines. They were the eyes and ears of the ship, designed to map the seabed, collect samples, and send back information that no human could gather on their own. Their sleek designs, with their sharp edges and blinking lights, gave them a presence that seemed almost alive. For the crew, these drones represented precision and safety. For the Cubs, they were a source of both excitement and nervousness. Each morning, a group of Cubs was sent to the drone pens with their supervisors. Their duties were small compared to the responsibilities of the senior staff, but even the smallest task felt important to them. Cleaning the pens, wiping the drone surfaces, checking cables, and reporting anything unusual, it all made them feel like they were part of something bigger. The supervisors never left them alone, always watching closely, always reminding them to be careful. The Cubs knew that even a small mistake here could damage equipment worth more than anything they had ever touched before. Still, the chance to work so close to the drones filled them with pride. The pens themselves had a quiet power to them. Each gate was locked, each compartment neatly organized. The blinking green and red lights on the drones gave the area a faint glow, casting shadows on the walls. The Cubs often whispered to each other as they worked, their voices carrying a mix of wonder and fear. Some were fascinated by the smooth surfaces of the drones, running a cloth carefully over the metal like they were polishing a treasure. Others kept a cautious distance, treating the machines with the kind of respect one might give a sleeping animal. For all their training, they still couldn't shake the feeling that the drones were watching them back, waiting for the moment when they would be powered on again. Tasks that might have seemed simple, checking a battery level, securing a latch, tightening a bolt, were lessons in patience and focus for the Cubs. Every step had to be reported, every action noted. Sometimes a Cub would get nervous, hands shaking as they worked, but the supervisors were patient. They would guide their hands, show them the correct angle, and remind them to breathe. Over time, the Cubs began to grow more confident, their movements smoother, their chatter less frantic. Still, their energy never fully disappeared. Even in the seriousness of the drone pens, there were moments when a laugh slipped out, or when one Cub nudged another as if daring them to touch a drone's cold surface. The seniors often pretended not to notice these little sparks of playfulness, but they knew it was part of learning. After all, the Cubs were not just there to work. They were there to understand, to grow, and to learn what it meant to carry responsibility. And the drone pens, with their quiet hum and their sense of importance, were the perfect classroom for that. Yet beneath all the routine, there was always a tension. The pens were secure, but everyone knew they had to remain that way. A gate left open, a latch forgotten, or a careless mistake could cause trouble that would spread far beyond the lower deck. The Cubs didn't think much about this, at least not yet. For them, the drone pens were simply part of their daily routine, another duty to complete before moving on. But for the seniors, every small action in this space carried weight. They knew the sea was unpredictable, and they knew the machines in these pens were too valuable to risk. And so, the Cubs continued their work, moving from one pen to another, cloths in hand, eyes wide with curiosity. To them, it was just another day of chores, another lesson, another step toward becoming part of the real crew. What they did not realize was that their eagerness, their small mistakes, and their restless energy were already stirring the kind of chance that could turn routine into something far less ordinary. The day was running like every other, the Cubs moving quickly between tasks with the kind of rhythm that comes from repetition. Their supervisors gave instructions, and the Cubs hurried to follow them, eager to finish before the bell rang for their break. The lower deck was buzzing with activity, cloths wiping, tools clicking, drones humming faintly in their pens. It all seemed routine, almost too ordinary. But it was in moments like these, when attention slipped just slightly, that small mistakes had the power to grow into something larger. One Cub, in his eagerness to move to the next pen, forgot to check the lock behind him. The gate clicked, but never sealed, left hanging open by a fraction. It was so small an oversight that no one noticed at first. The Cub himself didn't even realize. He had already rushed forward, cloth in hand, focusing on the next drone, completely unaware of what he had left behind. Minutes passed. The hum of the machines continued, steady and low. But then something shifted. Inside the open pen, the nearest drone gave a sudden twitch. Its sensors lit up, tiny red dots blinking to green as though responding to an unseen call. Slowly, almost cautiously, it drifted forward, rolling out of the pen's shadow and into the walkway. No one noticed right away. The Cubs were too busy, their chatter and footsteps drowning out the soft sound of the machine's movement. By the time one of them turned around, the drone was already out, its sensors rotating left and right as though it were searching for something unseen. The Cub who spotted it froze. At first, he thought it was part of a test. Maybe the supervisors had turned one on without telling them. But the look on the machine's blinking lights told a different story. It wasn't supposed to be moving. Panic rose in his chest, but before he could speak, another drone stirred. The gate left ajar had given more than one machine the freedom to respond, and now two more rolled forward, their sensors humming quietly. The cubs glanced at each other, wide-eyed, the realization dawning too late. Something had gone wrong. They whispered in hurried tones, debating whether to shout for a supervisor or try to handle it themselves. Some argued that if they admitted the mistake, they would surely be blamed. Others felt that ignoring it would only make things worse. Their fear was tangled with guilt, each of them knowing deep down that this had happened because they were too rushed, too eager to move quickly instead of carefully. The supervisors, still busy at the far end of the deck, had not yet turned to see what was happening. The cubs had only moments to decide. Meanwhile, the drones inched farther into the deck, their sensors sweeping across walls, floors, and even the cubs themselves. The machines didn't look alive, yet there was something unsettling about the way they moved, like curious creatures testing their boundaries. The blinking lights cast faint glows on the metal walls, making the quiet area feel strangely alive. Each step the drones took made the cubs' hearts beat faster. What if the machines activated fully? What if they damaged themselves? What if the supervisors noticed too late? The cub who had left the gate unlocked finally realized what had happened. His hands trembled as he stepped back toward the pen, trying to hide his fear. His plan was simple: close it before anyone noticed. But the gate creaked loudly when he touched it, the sound echoing through the deck. The nearest supervisor turned his head, his sharp eyes narrowing as he spotted the drones outside their compartments. Silence fell among the cubs. No one dared move. The mistake was now plain for all to see. The supervisor's voice cut through the quiet, calm but firm, as he demanded to know what had happened. The cubs exchanged guilty looks, each one avoiding the truth, though it was obvious enough. The drones, still active, continued to drift forward, and the room's tension grew heavier. What had started as a simple chore had turned into a problem none of them could ignore. The cubs had crossed the line between routine and risk, and now they stood on the edge of consequences they had not yet faced. The steady rhythm of the deck was broken when the human technician walked in, carrying a datapad under one arm and humming to himself. At first, he thought everything looked normal. Cubs bent over their duties, the faint hum of machines in the background, the metallic scent of oil lingering in the air. But then, his eyes caught a movement that didn't belong. One of the drones was outside its pen, its lights blinking in a restless rhythm as it rolled toward the middle of the walkway. His steps slowed, the hum in his throat fading. He stopped completely when he noticed two more drones edging forward, their sensors turning side to side, almost like animals sniffing for freedom. The technician's sharp mind pieced it together instantly. This wasn't part of a scheduled test, and no supervisor would allow this without preparation. The pens had been left unlocked. His gaze flicked to the cubs, and what he saw in their faces confirmed everything. Wide eyes, stiff postures, and the kind of nervous stillness that only came from guilt. He didn't need to ask who had made the mistake. The silence spoke louder than words. He raised his hand, palm open, motioning for them to stay calm. His eyes carried a warning. Don't shout, don't move suddenly, don't give the machines a reason to react. Panic would only make things spiral faster. The cubs swallowed hard and nodded, their shoulders trembling, but they stayed still. The technician's heart beat faster, though his face remained calm. He knew how sensitive the drone's sensors could be. If they picked up sudden signals or interference, they might activate subroutines that weren't meant to run in close quarters. A drone running freely on the lower deck could collide with equipment, damage itself, or worse, trigger a chain reaction among the others. Slowly, carefully, he set his datapad down on a nearby table, making sure not to make a sound that could echo across the deck. His movements were deliberate, steady, meant to show the cubs by example how control mattered more than speed. He crouched slightly, bringing himself to the same level as the machines, his eyes narrowing as he studied the nearest one. It rolled forward again, lights blinking in patterns he recognized from training manuals. The drone wasn't dangerous. Not yet, but it was searching, responding to the absence of control it was used to. That meant time was short. With a glance, he motioned for one cub to carefully circle around and close the nearest gate, locking it securely this time. The cub obeyed with shaky hands, every step feeling like it echoed louder than thunder, though in truth the room was silent except for the faint hum of the drones. The technician noticed how the other cubs were watching, frozen between fear and fascination. He wanted to speak, to explain that mistakes happened, that what mattered now was fixing it, but words could wait. Right now, focus was everything. He kept his eyes on the drones, shifting his weight slowly so as not to startle them. One of the machines rolled closer, its sensor beam sweeping across his boots, pausing for a second before moving on. The cubs held their breath as if even air might break the fragile balance. Finally, with a swift but measured move, the technician reached for the manual control panel mounted on the wall. His fingers hovered for a second before pressing the sequence that would send the drones a recall signal. A low beep followed, and the blinking lights on the machines flickered, hesitating as though debating whether to obey. Tension stretched in the air until, at last, the first drone rotated and began to roll back toward its pen. The others followed, their movements slow but purposeful. Relief rippled through the cubs, though none dared to exhale just yet. When the gates clicked shut again, secured properly this time, the technician finally straightened. He turned his gaze back to the cubs, his face calm but firm. The silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint sound of the drones powering down. His eyes carried no anger, only expectation. The cubs knew without words that they would have to explain themselves. They shifted uneasily, each one wishing someone else would speak first. The technician let the silence linger, teaching them in that pause that sometimes lessons weren't about loud scolding, but about the weight of responsibility. It was clear the mistake could have ended far worse, and though no damage was done, every cub now understood that their small actions carried big consequences. The technician had seen the danger before it grew, and in his calm response, he had not only secured the drones but also taught them something far more important. Control and composure could prevent disaster, even when mistakes had already been made. The technician stood quietly, his hand resting against the control panel, his mind racing through possibilities. The drones had responded to the recall signal, but their movements were sluggish, and their sensors still flickered in ways that told him they weren't fully settled. It was risky to rely only on commands when their systems seemed restless. He needed something simple, something that would hold their attention without triggering more confusion. His hand slipped into his pocket, brushing against a small tool he always carried, a basic laser pointer, usually used to check alignment on the drone's sensors during maintenance. He pulled it out slowly, his thumb brushing the smooth surface as he considered the idea. It wasn't designed for this, but sometimes improvisation was what kept a situation from unraveling. He crouched slightly and pressed the button, sending a slim red beam dancing across the metal floor. For a moment, nothing happened. The cubs stood frozen, holding their breaths, eyes locked on the glowing dot that skittered across the deck. Then, almost like animals catching sight of prey, two drones pivoted sharply, their sensors locking onto the light. Their mechanical bodies tilted forward, wheels humming softly as they began to follow. A low ripple of whispers passed through the cubs, but the technician shot them a warning glance, urging silence. This was no game. It was delicate control wrapped in chance. The red dot slid across the deck in a smooth line, and the drones followed with surprising precision. Their lights steadied, the restless flickering slowing to a steady pulse. The technician realized that the simplicity of the laser beam was giving the machines something to fix on, a task that calmed their searching subroutines. Instead of wandering aimlessly, they now had focus. He shifted the beam carefully, moving it in arcs and circles, testing their reactions. To his quiet satisfaction, the drones followed eagerly, rolling with soft hums. Their sensors locked tightly on the bright spot as though it was the only thing that mattered in the room. The cubs' eyes widened in awe, their fear slowly melting into fascination. Some leaned forward slightly, though they dared not move closer, watching as the once unstable drones seemed almost playful, chasing the light across the steel deck like children after a toy. The technician hid a small smile, though his face quickly returned to its calm seriousness. He couldn't let them think this was a trick or a distraction. It was a controlled method to guide the machines back without panic. Slowly, he shifted the light toward the open pen, guiding the drones one by one closer to the gate. The first rolled inside, its wheels clattering softly as it crossed the threshold, then powered down when it sensed the boundaries of its pen. The second followed just as smoothly, rolling forward as if mesmerized by the trail of red. The cubs exchanged quick glances of relief, though they kept silent, not wanting to break the strange spell. The technician could feel the tension loosening in the air, but he didn't let his guard down. One drone still lingered near the far side of the deck, hesitant, its sensors sweeping across the walls instead of the floor. He shifted the beam slowly in its direction, but the machine didn't immediately respond. For a long second, the silence grew heavy again. Then, with a soft whir, the drone sensors caught the light, and it rolled forward with surprising speed, chasing the dot eagerly until it too entered the pen. The final click of the gate echoed like a victory. The cubs exhaled at once, some pressing hands to their chests as if they hadn't realized they were holding their breath the entire time. Relief shimmered in their eyes, but the technician remained composed. He slipped the laser pointer back into his pocket and gave them a long, steady look. His message was silent but clear. Small tools, calm thinking, and presence of mind could prevent chaos when rules were forgotten. For the cubs, it was more than just a lesson in machinery. They had seen creativity in action, a reminder that problems could be solved without panic, using even the simplest of tools if one stayed calm enough to think. What had begun as a dangerous mistake was now becoming a memory they would never forget. A story whispered later not as shame, but as a moment where human ingenuity had turned near disaster into quiet triumph. The beam of red light slid across the steel floor, a tiny dot that seemed almost too small to matter, yet the drones locked onto it instantly. Their sensors flared with purpose, and in a synchronized hum, they rolled forward as if the laser had become their only mission. The cubs gasped, their nervous fear dissolving into wide-eyed amazement. Only minutes ago, the drones had been loose and unpredictable, a threat to the order of the ship. But now they moved with remarkable focus, darting after the beam like mechanical hunters. The technician kept his wrists steady, careful not to make any sudden or erratic motions, but even he was surprised at how well the drones responded. It was as though they had been waiting for something to guide them, and the beam provided exactly that. The cubs couldn't resist the scene unfolding before them. At first they stood back, hesitant, unsure if this strange control would hold. But as one of the drones pivoted quickly, chasing the dot in a wide circle, the youngest of the cubs laughed softly, a sound that carried across the deck like a spark. It was quickly hushed by nervous glances, but it was too late. The mood had shifted. Their fear was gone, replaced with a bubbling curiosity that made them edge closer. One boy stretched his arms out, pretending to chase the light himself, his boots clanging on the deck as he mimicked the drone's movements. Another joined him, then another, until half a dozen cubs were trailing after the red dot alongside the drones, their laughter mixing with the mechanical whirring in a strange, playful harmony. The technician frowned at first, wanting to stop them, but then he hesitated. They weren't interfering. If anything, their presence seemed to keep the drones from veering off course, as if the machines took comfort in the crowd moving in the same direction. The cubs darted left when the dot curved left, stomped to a halt when the light paused, then burst forward again when it leapt across the deck. The drones followed the exact same rhythm, sensors fixed, bodies turning and rolling with seamless precision. The deck became a stage, with red light as the conductor and both machines and humans as its eager performers. Crew members passing by stopped to watch. At first they stood in confusion, whispering at the strange sight of drones rolling freely while the cubs skipped beside them. But when they noticed the technician's steady control of the laser pointer, their expressions softened. Some smiled faintly, others shook their heads, but no one interrupted. It wasn't just a problem anymore. It was becoming something no one had expected. A shared moment of levity, born from a mistake that could have ended in chaos. As the chase continued, the cubs grew bolder. One leaned down, clapping his hands near the dot as though trying to catch it, while another laughed and dashed in front of a drone, only to skip aside as it rolled past, intent on its target. Their boots echoed against the metal floor, their movements clumsy yet filled with youthful energy, while the drone's hums added a mechanical rhythm that kept the scene strangely balanced. For the first time in hours, the deck wasn't filled with tension. It was filled with life. The technician guided the light carefully toward the open pens, but he didn't rush. He let the chase continue just a little longer, sensing its importance. These cubs, often scolded for their mistakes and inexperience, were finally part of something remarkable. They weren't being disciplined, nor ignored. They were playing a role in keeping the ship safe. It was a lesson they would remember far longer than any lecture. Finally, he swept the dot closer to the pen gates. The cubs followed obediently, still mimicking the chase, while the drones rolled right behind them. One by one, the machines slipped back inside the pens, their system settling as though satisfied. The cubs slowed too, their laughter fading into quiet pride. What had started as an accident had turned into a chase neither human nor machine would forget. A moment of unity where play became purpose, and fear turned into a story worth retelling. The red beam moved swiftly across the deck, and the drones rolled after it, their sensors locked in perfect focus. What could have been a dangerous accident had transformed into something almost playful, and the cubs could no longer contain themselves. They ran alongside the machines, their boots clanging against the steel floor as they mimicked the chase, laughing with a kind of joy that came only when fear finally gave way to relief. Their laughter carried across the wide space, echoing against the walls, lightening the air that had felt heavy just minutes before. The youngest cub leapt in front of one of the drones, darted to the side, and then laughed again as it continued to follow the glowing red dot without hesitation. Another clapped her hands as if cheering for the machine, making the others giggle harder. Their faces, once tight with nerves, now shone with the ease of children caught up in a game. The technician kept his grip on the small laser pointer, his movements steady but slow. He understood that this moment wasn't only about guiding the drones back into their pens. It had become something greater. The cubs were learning a lesson in calm, in creativity, and in how sometimes the best way to solve a problem wasn't with shouting or panic, but with patience and clever thinking. He could have scolded them, could have barked orders, but instead he allowed their energy to flow naturally into the situation. Their laughter, mixed with the quiet hum of the drones, filled the deck with a strange sense of harmony. It wasn't long before the sound reached others. Footsteps pounded on the upper deck stairs as officers hurried toward the commotion, prepared to face what they thought would be chaos. Free drones spinning out of control, cubs panicking, alarms blaring. But when they reached the railings and looked down, they stopped in confusion. Instead of disorder, they found the cubs darting across the floor, laughing, while the drones calmly followed the red light as though caught in a harmless game of tag. The officers glanced at one another, their expressions softening from stern determination to bemused surprise. One even let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head at the sight. For a long moment, none of them moved. They simply stood watching, realizing that the danger had already passed. What was left was something that resembled a story out of childhood. Machines chasing a dot, children chasing beside them, and laughter ringing where fear should have been. A few officers exchanged quiet words, but no one barked commands, no one shouted orders to stop. It was too rare a moment of lightness in a place where discipline ruled the day. They understood instinctively that cutting it short would mean losing something valuable. Down on the deck, the cubs barely noticed the officers watching. They were too caught up in the strange game. One cub, flushed with excitement, tripped slightly, then laughed even harder as his stumble drew more giggles from the others. Another waved her arms dramatically as she ran, almost as though she believed she was leading the drones herself. The drones, of course, paid attention only to the light, but their steady pursuit gave the illusion that they were part of the laughter too, partners in the chase. The technician, calm as ever, let the moment continue. He knew they couldn't play forever. The drones needed to be secured, and rules still mattered. But he also knew this was a story the cubs would carry with them long after this day. He guided the light slowly, deliberately, not rushing, so the scene could stretch a little longer. The cubs were learning without being taught, gaining confidence without being lectured, and even the officers seemed willing to let it happen. When the dot moved toward the open pens, the cubs followed, still laughing, their voices ringing like a chorus. The drones rolled after them obediently, their sensors locked on their glowing guide. Step by step, the harmless game led them back to safety. Officers who had come ready for disaster now stood silently, watching with faint smiles. The scene had turned the tension of a mistake into something warm and unforgettable. For that moment, the deck was not a place of strict rules and duties, but a place where laughter, even on a ship built for serious work, had the power to hold everything together. The red dot from the technician's laser moved slowly toward the pen, a steady glow on the floor. The drones, as if enchanted, followed without hesitation. Their sensors locked on the light, rolling forward in smooth, controlled movements. The cubs, who only moments ago had been laughing and running in excitement, now grew more serious. They understood the importance of what was happening. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was their chance to help correct the mistake that had nearly caused trouble. The technician didn't rush. Each step was measured, each sweep of the laser deliberate. He knew that sudden movements might confuse the drones or throw the cubs into panic again. Instead, he kept the pace steady, a rhythm the cubs could follow. He gestured for them to spread out on either side, forming a gentle guide with their presence. They weren't pushing the drones physically, but their watchful movements created a path, giving the machines a sense of direction beyond the light. One cub, with eyes wide and heart pounding, stepped closer than the others, careful not to touch the drones but watching their reactions closely. Another cub waved her hand softly at the edge of the group, helping to steer them like invisible shepherds guiding their flock. It was teamwork born in the moment, not from orders but from instinct. They had seen the mistake, felt the fear, and now they were part of the solution. The pens loomed closer. The metallic gate stood open, waiting. The technician crouched slightly, lowering the laser dot to guide the drones across the threshold. For a breathless second, the cubs held still, as if afraid something might go wrong. But the first drone rolled forward without resistance, crossing into its place. Relief spread across the deck like a wave, softening every tense shoulder and calming every restless footstep. "Good," the technician whispered under his breath. Though the cubs heard the encouragement in his tone, their eyes brightened, their confidence lifting. One by one, the remaining drones followed, the hum of their systems steady and controlled. Each machine settled into its pen as though nothing unusual had ever happened. The cubs exchanged looks of quiet pride, their hearts lighter than before. When the final drone rolled inside, the technician slid the laser pointer back into his pocket and nodded firmly. With a smooth motion, he locked the gate. The sharp click of the latch echoed across the deck, a sound of closure and safety. The cubs exhaled almost in unison, releasing the breath they hadn't realized they were holding. What had started as a small mistake had ended in a lesson they would not forget. The technician turned to face them. He didn't scold or lecture. His eyes carried the weight of experience, but also a spark of approval. "You see what calm thinking can do?" he said softly, his voice steady but kind. The cubs nodded, some shyly, some with smiles beginning to form. They understood. A mistake hadn't ruined them. It had taught them. Around the edges of the deck, a few officers who had stayed to watch also relaxed. Their stern expressions had softened, their hands no longer ready to intervene. They had witnessed not only the technician's skill, but the cub's growth. In silence, they acknowledged that order had been restored without shouting, without punishment, through patience, cleverness, and a little bit of trust. The cubs stood taller now. Though their uniforms still marked them as trainees, they carried themselves with a touch more confidence. The day had given them something no classroom or lecture could provide: the knowledge that even mistakes can be turned into victories if handled with courage and calm. The drones rested quietly in their pens once more, as if they had never strayed. The ship itself seemed to breathe easier, its steady hum resuming its usual rhythm. Above, the sea stretched endlessly, unaware of the small drama that had just played out on the lower deck. But for the cubs, it was a day they would carry with them, a moment when they had learned that order can be restored not just by rules, but by heart, patience, and quick thinking. The story of the drones and the laser quickly became a memory shared by everyone on the vessel. At first, the crew had been tense, worried that the unlocked pen might lead to disaster, but as the hours passed, the seriousness of the moment softened into something lighter. In the mess hall that evening, laughter rose as one of the officers playfully mimicked the drones darting after the red dot, making others chuckle as they remembered the unusual scene. What had begun as a mistake was now retold with humor, a reminder of how quickly fear could turn into something harmless when handled with calm and creativity. The cubs sat together at a long table, their shoulders still stiff with the memory of being scolded earlier. But now they found themselves smiling when older crew members clapped them on the back and teased, "You trained drones to play fetch today." For once, the teasing was not sharp or mocking, it carried warmth. A tone of acceptance that told the cubs they had earned a place in the crew's shared stories. One cub leaned forward, whispering that his heart had raced when the drones first rolled out of the pens, and another admitted she almost panicked before the technicians signaled them to stay calm. They all laughed when one of them described the way the drones had followed the light like excited pets, skidding across the deck as if chasing something alive. It was strange, they thought, how a mistake had given them a story to tell, a story where they weren't simply the cause of trouble, but also part of the solution. For young trainees who were often reminded of their inexperience, that shift meant more than words could explain. The technician, usually a quiet man, joined them briefly. He didn't speak much but gave a nod that carried weight, the kind of gesture that meant he had seen their growth. That small acknowledgement was enough to make the cubs sit a little taller. The officers, too, began weaving the event into shipboard banter, calling the cubs drone herders, or joking that perhaps the next mission should involve a laser pointer instead of complicated commands. Even though everyone knew the seriousness of the initial mistake, the way it ended had transformed the memory into something that bound the crew together rather than dividing them. Later that night, as the vessel rocked gently against the waves, some of the cubs sat out on the deck looking at the stars overhead. The sea stretched endlessly, dark and calm, and they whispered about how close they had been to real trouble. But more than fear, what lingered in their minds was the way they had followed the technician's steady hand, learning that leadership did not always come from loud voices or strict rules. Sometimes it came from a small red dot and the patience to guide chaos into order. They understood now that mistakes didn't have to define them. They could become stepping stones if handled with courage and calm. From that day forward, whenever the crew gathered, someone always found a way to bring up the chase. It became part of the vessel's lore, a memory told not with shame but with pride. For the cubs, it was proof that even when they stumbled, they could stand again, and that even the most ordinary day at sea could leave behind a story worth remembering. The story of the drones chasing the laser pointer did not fade away quickly. Instead, it settled deep into the life of the vessel, retold in different voices and remembered in different tones, sometimes with laughter and sometimes with a quiet nod of respect. What had started as a mistake slowly became something more, a reminder to every person on board that even accidents could carry lessons worth holding on to. The cubs, who had been nervous at first, began to understand that their journey on the ship wasn't only about learning rules and avoiding errors. It was also about growing through experiences, even the unexpected ones. When they walked across the deck the next morning, the older crew members smiled knowingly at them, some shaking their heads, others chuckling as though they could still see the drones darting after the glowing dot. For the cubs, those smiles meant they were no longer just seen as inexperienced trainees. They were becoming part of the crew's shared memory. Over time, the story found its way into conversations in the mess hall, during late-night watch shifts, and even in casual banter between officers. Someone would joke about using a laser pointer as standard equipment, and the room would fill with laughter. Yet behind the humor lay a truth. The crew had learned something important about themselves. They had seen how quickly fear could turn into order when people kept calm and worked together, and how even the simplest idea, a red dot on the floor, could prevent panic from spiraling out of control. The cubs, who had once felt like outsiders, carried that lesson with pride. They spoke of it among themselves, recalling how their first instinct had been to panic, and how relief had washed over them when the technician showed them a different way forward. For the senior staff, the incident became a story to share with future trainees, not as a warning, but as encouragement. They would tell new cubs, "You'll make mistakes, but remember, what matters most is how you face them." That message sank deeply into the hearts of the young ones, for they realized that duty was not always about walking stiffly or wearing a mask of seriousness. Duty could also mean being creative, flexible, and even playful when the moment allowed. There was dignity in solving a problem, but there was also joy, and that balance was something they would carry with them far beyond the walls of the vessel. As weeks turned into months, the cubs often found themselves replaying the scene in their minds, the sudden shock of seeing drones loose, the quick wave of the technician's hand urging calm, and the way their own fear had softened into laughter as the chase began. They knew it wasn't just a story about drones and a laser pointer. It was a story about them, about their first step toward understanding what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves. That knowledge gave them confidence. They no longer feared every small mistake as the end of their journey, but instead as a chance to prove that they could recover, adapt, and keep moving forward. And so the tale of the drones became a kind of legend. Not because it was grand or heroic, but because it was human. It carried laughter, relief, humility, and growth, all woven into one memory. The cubs would never forget that day, for it taught them that even in the strict routines of duty, there was space for joy, and even in the middle of accidents, there was room to create something worth remembering. It was a lesson not written in manuals or orders, but in the lived moments of life at sea, a lesson they would carry with them long after the waves had taken them to new horizons.